Stephanie, good
Hi.
afternoon. How are you? Welcome to the regular. For those of you tuning in, this is your first your official part of the podcast gig. So welcome. Glad to see you here.
I'm going to tear up. This is so emotional.
She is totally serious about that too. Steph, one thing you guys will learn is that there is no sarcasm living in Stephanie whatsoever. We have not fired Chris. Chris will be back tomorrow and Thursday. So we're going to just alternate the three of us. Today we have really kind of a nerdy subject. Do you have any experience with technical debt?
Yeah, actually, we do a lot of technical debt work with our clients on a bigger scale for sure. But it's, for any clients who are building products or building solutions, even in the public sector, they inevitably get to this place. And we got to deal with it.
Well, you would be fascinated to know. I just happen to have this off the top of my head. According to Stripe's research, developers spend 42% of their time dealing with technical debt maintenance rather than building new features. That's nearly half their productive hours. So I'm doing the math there for you. 42% is nearly half, just for those of you tuning in. They do that half of their time fixing yesterday's shortcuts instead of creating tomorrow's breakthroughs. Here's something most people don't know about Mark Benioff. Before Salesforce became a CRM giant we know today, he actually had to completely rebuild the entire platform 3 times in the first 5 years because of scaling issues. Today on How to Founder, we'll be talking about how we can avoid technical debt trap through sustainable growth planning. I'm Anthony Franco, and with me today is my wonderful co-host, Stephanie. And with us, we have Sonia, who has spent 2 decades turning broken tech ideas into thriving global businesses. As managing director of Converge and founder of Minusado and Field Eagle, she's mastered the art of building systems that scale without crumbling. She's also survived breast cancer while running a company and rebuilt her life after a divorce, proving that resilience isn't just a business strategy, it's a survival skill. Today, she helps other founders navigate the brutal early stages of tech startups, creating sustainable growth strategies and achieve real product market fit. There's a reason why Chris usually does these intros, because I suck at them. I'm sorry about that. Sonia, it's good to see you. Welcome.
It was a good try.
It was. Yeah. I am doing my best. I'm a better color man than a lead, as my wife will tell you.
Hi, how are you?
Are you with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay, this year. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and start. So why do many founders treat technical debt like it's someone else's problem until it becomes everyone's crisis?
I think part of it is because it's not really a priority in the early stages, because they're so focused on, I have an idea, it's a fantastic idea, let's build it. They're thinking short term, not long term. So this is my idea, I want to make $1 million and exit in a year, but they're not really thinking about where they're going to be in 5 years, 10 years. And they're also not thinking about scaling and maintenance and all of those things. So I think it's a bit of a short term thinking process that goes into it and not long term. And so they're not thinking about, is the technology that we're choosing to use today still going to be around in the next 6 months and supported? And I also don't think that there's enough research going into, is this the right technology for us? Like, for example, I was talking to a client and they were like, oh, we're going to use Python to build this application. And I was like, why would you do that when you're working with a company that's in mining, where high security is very important? And they just don't think about those things up front, especially when you're working with large enterprise clients. And I think it's just a planning phase. There's a lot of pieces that are missing.
I would say Go ahead, Steph.
You go ahead. No.
Well, I was just going to say, isn't that why most technical co-founders get into startups, so they don't have to worry about stuff like this?
Yeah, I guess it is. But you know what? Like, okay, a lot of founders are not always technical people, and they'll hire like a CTO or an interim CTO to come in and help them. If you don't have like, again, everyone is so at the passionate stage, and everyone has a certain experience. So if they went to school and they learned this language, of course that's the language that they're going to want to build in. So, for example, if you're building a very simple SaaS based product, do you go with .NET or do you go with like a Python or something else, right? It's I find that startups don't choose the technology that they're going to use based on market needs and sustainability. It's based on, this is the person I hired, or this is the person on my team, and this is the technology that they know. That's just
So
how
literally the language you choose could be your first step into technical debt. Stephanie, what do you think?
Well, I was just going to say, like, this is the ongoing tension in any sort of technology-driven organization between innovation and, long-term sustainability. And so, in a small startup, it's one thing, and then in a large organization where we are often dealing with technical debt that's years and years old, it's like, they get into this cycle where it's like, oh, we need to make the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, even in a not-for-profit organization. And so what we end up with is this constant demand, and nobody's factoring in and building a budget for technical debt and alleviating technical debt. So how do you advise founders and maybe bigger organizations to find the right balance between we work with product managers, and we try to tell them that part of their job is to make sure they're budgeting for this in the full life cycle of a product. But tell me a little bit more about how you're working with founders to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about with founders, but also we do some work with old legacy systems. And my advice is always, look, whether you're building something or you have something built, you're always going to have to continue building. You're always going to want new features or upgrades and things like that. So I say, when you're planning out your roadmap for your product, whether it's a legacy system or a new system, make sure that every couple of months or at every new feature, you're analyzing something that's older. And when you're building out this new feature with a change request, for example, you're not only building a new feature, you're also fixing the old outdated technology or source code, fixing it, going through it. And so you're sort of like upgrading the system as you go slowly by building these new features within that section, right? So at some point they'll get to a phase where they've fixed old legacy code from 10 years ago. It's not going to happen all at once. I've seen companies try to fix and then rebuild an entire system. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I know it's not funny, but I'm laughing because they were like, oh yeah, we spent 5 years taking an old legacy system and turning it into SaaS. And then after 5 years and having like 25 people on the team, they had to scrap it. It wasn't like they had totally not built it right. And I said, you guys could have just taken what you had and built slowly, but built it right and upgrade that as you go. So I don't know if there's a right solution to it, but I think that it's not just technical. It's also like common sense. How do you really solve this problem? Do you, I think it's the thinking process that goes into it. And I mean, we're all techies here, but I will say this, tech people tend to overcomplicate things. So I think it's really important to have somebody on your team that can think with common sense and really know how to solve a problem.
That's a lie. That's a bold-faced lie.
There's
Go ahead, Stephanie.
No, you go ahead. No.
I'm curious if there's anything to be learned about how, like, bigger so for startups, right, or for early stage companies, is there anything to be learned about how companies like Apple and Microsoft and Google and Salesforce manage technical debt? Like the opening story, that Salesforce rewrote 3 times. I don't think that's the way I kind of positioned it. Now they think about it is like that was a bad thing. In reality, maybe that was the right way to do it.
I actually wish they would, right? Like you see these big old legacy systems from, 1984, and it's all tape and bubblegum and spaghetti that's built upon old code. And so you get, it's like you build concentric limitations into your product as you go, right?
Yeah. But if you also take a different development approach where you don't build an entire system, you build the foundation of it, and then every other piece of it is built as a module. So it's a completely separate piece. It's not part of that base, that foundation, so that when you do have issues, going back to the foundation is an easier process. So if you need to fix the foundation, if you need to upgrade the technology, you're just working with that foundation and not all the other pieces that have been put on top of it afterwards, right? So even like with our own products, that's just something we do. That's just a process for us. We build everything modular so that we can strip it apart when we need to because, like, let's be real, we have a product that we can completely rebuild, but because it was modular, we were able to take other modules that we had built afterwards that were newer and bring it in, and so it reduces the time of having to rebuild something completely from scratch.
To me, there's these two really important roles, and I want to come back to what we talked about just a minute ago with how you sort of operationalize and put guardrails in place to ensure that, we're balancing our budget between innovation and, addressing technical debt or addressing any of those kind of lagging sustainment issues. And to me, there's two important roles here. There's the role of the product manager, and then there's the role of the architect. And, when you look at like a DevOps model or something like that, that's all very much based on the concept of a product manager being like a mini CEO of a product team. And so what we found is product managers often get dragged into the demands of the business. And all of a sudden, you have these best intentions of saying we've got 20% of our development effort has to be towards relieving technical debt, but then that never happens. So how do you put the guardrails in place to make sure that it does?
I mean, I think it has to be done right from the get-go before any development is even started, right? And the team has to understand that these are the guardrails we're putting up, and this is how we're gonna. Yeah, I mean, the project manager gets sucked into other things, but it's really about making sure that the plan is understood and that the communication is effective right at the get-go. And yeah, if you use tools, there are tools that can help you guard all of that stuff, right? So there should be source code reviews at different times of the development lifecycle. So if you're building something that you estimate that's going to take about a year, you want to be able to do like a source code review every 3 months. And if you haven't done anything prior to that, at that review time, that's when you should be going through the list of all of your guards and say, okay, we missed this. There should be like a continuous process of reviewing to make sure that you're not missing those things. Because sometimes you can get sucked into, oh, we have this and there's a bug and we need to fix it, and everyone's scrambling, right? And there are things in the process that get missed, like reviews and things like that. But there should be a cutoff where nothing gets past this point unless we do a review, I think.
I am curious here. So there's this conundrum, especially when we're talking about earlier stage companies that their job is to just get something out, just ship something that can be sold, right?
Yeah.
Ship something that your salespeople or probably your CEO, and sometimes it's the same person that's developing the code that's selling. But the job is to start bringing cash in, to bring money in, and so taking the time to properly plan the technology and the rollout of the technology can literally delay your launch to an extent where you lose your window to launch. So is it okay to launch something that's built with duct tape and chewing gum, knowing that you're going to have to completely rewrite it? Or is that even a bad idea to think about in the first place?
No, I think that's a great plan, and I encourage that all the time. Like, that's what I call an MVP, a minimal viable product, right? You're literally using an MVP to go to market, test the market, talk to users, get feedback. But the plan is an MVP is not going to be your final product. You're basically using it to test the market, get some revenue, so maybe you can bootstrap and things like that. But I think that's the perfect approach that everyone should go about, because like really, if you spend 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years building like the perfect product to take to market, what happens when you take it to market and your UI is not where the users want it to be, and the usability is terrible, and you've spent all this time and money? Isn't it better to just build something small, just a bare bones, get it to market, make some money, test it out, and then rebuild?
Well, so I totally agree with you, Stephanie. There's no better product manager to tell you what your product needs to be than having a customer take a look at your product and tell you, right? So, duct tape and chewing gum to get customer feedback might be a strategy. Stephanie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I own a software company and we built a product 14 years ago. And the very first I mean, it's a good product.
I'm just teasing.
Why do you feel like that?
Because sorry, I forgot. I thought you had the same thick skin that Chris does. I apologize.
No, I'm very proud. So the very first iteration of our product, I built, and I'm not a developer, and I didn't do any coding. I built it on a little front end UI tool, which helped us realize that we actually needed to build a product. But the first iteration of that was just we asked forgiveness as opposed to permission, and we went in there and we made the process changes, and we got the people, and they hated us. Like, they did not want to make a change. But by doing that, we figured out what we needed to build into a real product. And it was, it was clumsy, but it was exactly the kind of feedback that we needed. And I would say, as the minute you can get it into the hands of a customer, even if it's a drawing on a napkin, you're going to get the sort of the right feedback. Sonia, what I would ask you too is what are the signs? Like, how do you know when you've got mounting technical debt?
I mean, it depends on the project and the people working on it. But like the other day, I was talking to someone and I was actually saying this about an MVP. He's a founder and he's been building something out for a couple of years, and he's never really launched it to market, doesn't have any customers, but he's spent like a couple $100,000 building out this product. So I was saying to him, listen, why don't you just focus on getting what you already have, which is more than an MVP, and get it out to market to get that feedback. And he challenged me, and he was like, I don't know, he told me the title of some book, I can't even remember it. And he was like, well, nowadays that has changed. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, now consumers and people who are buying, their buying method or thought has changed. They're looking for a lot more things, more features. And so he's just been building. But now he's got this product that nobody wants to buy, right? And then I looked at it and I said, okay, this is not a bad idea. When you sort of thought about this, maybe you were a little bit ahead of the curve, but since you didn't launch it, you've now lost market strategy. Like, there's a lot of other people doing what you originally set out to do with this. However, looking at it, there's still potential here to use it. But to answer your question, because he just built so much on top of it without getting that feedback, now he needs to completely strip it apart in order to get it to what I think could be something that would be useful for the market. But he's got to sort of go back and redo the whole thing. So I think it really is, look, founders, again, I'm going to keep saying this because I see it all the time. They're passionate about what they want and their product, but you have to plan, and it's not going to be perfect along the way. Things are going to come up, but it's better to think about those things up front and at least have some sort of plan to reduce risk. Even if you're not reducing risk by 80%, you're just reducing it by 10%. Like, have a plan in place to reduce some of that risk. And there are different ways to go about it, right? Like I said, you can build modular, you can build an MVP, keep it very basic, and then you can even your MVP could be your foundation, right? And then you could build on top of it, choosing the right technology. But this is just a vicious circle that founders sort of get stuck in. But to your point, Stephanie, I thought that was great what you just said. Like, build even just a mock-up of what it could be and show it to people and get that feedback. That's valuable information, and you didn't spend as much money building something and doing it wrong and then having to redo it.
This is really, go ahead, Stephanie. I was just gonna say, this is really good advice. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so like, what are those indicators that you've been, at this for a little while, and now you've got some problems because you haven't paid attention to those shortcuts you might have taken, or those, like, we've ended up in that place with our software product, and we had to, build a whole 1-year roadmap readjustment plan because we just got swept aside in customer delivery and so on and so forth. So, what are some indicators that you better start paying attention to this?
Some indicators. Okay, I think I'm just going to base it like on my own personal experience. I've now rebuilt 2 products from scratch, and the number one indicator was the product was not sellable. Nobody was buying it. Nobody was spending money on it. I think that's a huge indicator that something is not right. The second one was we sort of rushed a little bit, and we didn't think about, it was an MVP, but it wasn't. And the things that should have been part of the MVP, we didn't make it part of the MVP, and things that should not have been were. So things like, are you going to be accepting payment? Is it a SaaS solution? And is it subscription? So if that's the case, then you're going to need something in place to be able to collect payment, right? And if you're not going to have like an API connection to a third party that's going to be able to process credit card things for you, what else can you use? Can you use like a API to PayPal, something that will make that process easier, right? So when you're going to market and you're trying to get, some sales, reduce that technical debt, like it's truly really identifying what are the challenges that you're seeing right from the get-go when you launch that MVP. Those are the critical things that are going to help you. And then you just build it, right? Okay, we missed the payment method. Okay, now that the MVP is built, it's good, it's in market. Like, we know that this piece is really critical. Okay, the team should be focusing on building that, and then fixing anything in between that. But like, the indicators, I think they're black and white. You can't bring on a client. Nobody wants to pay for your product. There's bugs. You go from launching QA past it, and all of a sudden you're getting all these reports from on your app, or bad reviews that the system doesn't work, people are not able to do things. I think those are indicators right up front that you've built a bad product, or you haven't really tested it out completely, and it's just not ready for market.
In my
Steph, you want to add to why don't you add to that list a little bit too? Yeah,
I was going to say, in my experience, it ends up feeling like you're getting pushed into a corner. So you're working with customers, they're asking for new things, and it's getting harder and harder to deliver them because you've painted yourself into a corner with your technical choices being dragged along by, what the customer is demanding, or one customer is demanding who happens to be a big customer, right? And so then it starts to feel like you get less and less and less and less flexibility inside of your product. And all of a sudden we are looking at this product and it feels paralyzed, right? It feels like we're unable to scale anyway. And so have you experienced, like, what do startups do what do they do wrong when they're trying to scale in a product-based business? Like, is it the reactivity? Is it like, what's the best way for them to anticipate that growth?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I remember when early on in one of our startups, Field Ego, we, instead of doing the traditional way of launching a product, which is you start small, you take on a couple small clients. We took on a whale of a client, which was a major mining client. And we brought them on because we won them through an RFP, and they actually selected us versus our competitors who have been doing this for years and years, because we were a startup and we had the flexibility to build things that they needed that were not part of these other products out of the box. And so we had no idea that this project was going to end up like just 5 years in. It was a complete nightmare. And the reason was, we were a startup. We were in the process of, we had already built a product, but now we were taking on this major client who's going to pay us. And what ended up happening was, they ended up basically taking our product and building it to a way that it was specific to the mining industry. So we had come out, when we first wanted to launch the product, it wasn't just for mining, it was for a couple of industries. But then once we started getting into it, we realized, okay, mining and oil and gas and infrastructure, they're all very similar. So I'll give you an example. We had to build a report for them that was called a it was a type of compliance report, and it was very specific for mining, because it was like a preventative maintenance report that would help them prevent disasters from happening to their assets and things like that. And but then when we realized we were stuck with this one report for this one industry, we started doing research, and then we figured out, okay, like, no, we're not stuck. This report can be used for this industry and this industry and this industry. So when we identified that a couple of features in, like 2 years into building this customization for this client, we realized, yes, we're kind of stuck in this role now where we have to build this customization for this client on our product. It's making the product very like mining specific. But then we identified that there are a lot of other industries like mining that we could cater those features to. So we started opening our just our strategy into, yes, we're going to build this for this client, but we're also going to add this for that industry and that industry. Yes, it took us about 2 years to sort of like figure that out. But once we were done, we ended up with a product that was for mining, oil and gas, manufacturing. We were able to sort of adapt after 2 years. So it did take a little while for us to learn those lessons. But once we did, we were very careful in making sure that, hey, we're not building a product specifically for this industry. We wanted to be able to pivot to other industries and make sure that the features are sort of aligned with that. And that's how we went about it.
You bring up something interesting, and there's this notion of technical debt, which can be legacy platforms that you've built on. It can be bad code. It could be building something for one client and realizing it needs to be for another. But there's also feature debt, right? And building in features that for a client that is not necessarily good for all clients.
Yeah.
One more. I'm going to ask one more quick question before we go into the speed round here. Actually, I have a bunch of questions, but I think I'll focus it on co-founders. So, oftentimes in companies that are technical companies, you have essentially a go-to-market person and you have a technical person. Rarely do you have the same person, the same individual doing both roles. Mm-hmm. Now, at least not for a long time. And I've seen companies break because these two individuals can't negotiate the time to market versus the time to build it, quote, right. So if you're sitting in each other's seat, if you're telling the go-to-market person what to think about when thinking about the technical person, and swap it, what does the technical person need to think about when they're talking to the go-to-market person, when they're having this negotiated conversation about when to launch and when to fortify?
Stephanie, do you want in on this at all?
Well, as always, I have opinions, but I'd love to hear your response.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard. Like, it's hard because, yeah, you're right. They're two completely different people. I think I don't know how to answer this. Hang on. I think it's really like, to me, and this is just my own personal opinion, I'm not saying it's the right way to go about it. To me, the most valuable thing in a founder or co-founder is the ability to sell. The technology is secondary. It can be fixed later. You can do whatever you want. Can we sell this product? Can we get it to market before our five other competitors that are behind us? And I just have the mentality that it's like, do whatever you got to do to get it to market, and then all those little things you can fix them after. Again, in with keeping in mind that you haven't spent 5 years building a product. You're still very early on. It's a small piece of software, and you can launch it enough to get sales, get that feedback. I think that's the most important thing. Like, the technology, you can always build it out after. You should always have a co-founder that's really focused on business development, sales, and marketing, and then another one that's really focused on the technology, the roadmap. How those two people come together and agree, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But a technical team should be driven by sales.
So
But that's just my own
Stephanie,
personal
want to
opinion.
weigh in really quick before the speed run?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a really important role here, which is the product manager, and that's that person that sits. So each of those roles need to be visionary. You need a technical visionary, and you need a strategy visionary. And then you've got the role that's in between that says, okay, kids, like, these are great, but I'm here to sit between both of you and say, I see the strategy and I see the technical vision, and I'm going to help you execute on that in a way that, balances out both these things. A good product manager understands that that's their role, to understand the market and to understand the technology. And I think that role, like, I'm working on building a big product management function right now inside an organization, and that role is so critically important.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that.
All right. Sonia, are you ready for the speed? All right, here we go. Build in-house or buy existing solutions?
Build offshore.
Refactor continuously or schedule major overhauls? Which approach survives rapid scaling?
The first one.
Hire senior developers early or train junior developers in your way?
Hire consultants who know what they're doing.
Modular architecture or monolithic simplicity?
Modular.
Document everything or keep it tribal knowledge? That's
Document
a softball.
everything.
That's not even a fair one. That's a softball one. Thank you, Sonia. Stephanie, why don't you go ahead and wrap it up for us? Give us your fundamentals.
Yeah. So the key takeaways for me: plan that roadmap. Make sure that you're analyzing new features as well as fixing old habits. The sooner you can build a culture of having a budget for both and balancing innovation as well as technical debt is critically important. Second point was around building modularly. So you don't build a system, you build rather a bunch of related features, and you do source code reviews as part of your continuous process. Use MVPs to keep you from investing too much in one iteration. Indicators that you have technical debt, your product wasn't sellable. There's lots of roadblocks coming up when you have customer requests. And finally, this point is so important to me. Watch out for bringing on clients that might be too big or demanding for where you're at in your own growth. We did that, and we're seeing the effects of that now.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. All right. Deep dives: Working Effectively with Legacy Code by Michael Feathers. The Pragmatic Programmer by Thomas and Hunt. Accelerate the Science of Lean Software DevOps by Nicole Forsgren. Sorry. Clean Architecture, A Craftsman's Guide to Software Structure and Design by Martin. Sonia, where can we learn more about you?
Yes, you can go to my website. It's actually called soniacouto.com, my first name and last name. And there you can see my whole portfolio, everything that I do, and reach out.
All right. Stephanie, what are we talking about next time? Why don't you wrap the show up for us?
You want me to wrap the show up for us? Okay,
yeah.
Well, this is my first time doing a show wrap-up.
I'm throwing you in with both feet.
Okay, tomorrow we're talking about what got you here won't get you there with Derek Fredrickson. And that is a show where we are going to explore how your biggest wins might be setting you up for your biggest failures. So tune in tomorrow for our live show, and it's going to be hosted, I think, by Chris.
Chris, yeah. And remember to visit us at How to Fania. Sonia, thank you so much for jumping on with Stephanie and I, and we'll see you all next time. Take care.